So I found pornography when I was 13. By the time I got to be a senior in high school, it went from like having a place in my life to like taking over. When I started to like struggle with my schoolwork, when I started to struggle with my studies, that's when I tried to stop. And I found out that I couldn't. I wanted so badly to feel like I could tell somebody and get help. It wasn't until a year later, I was at a different college, and the dean's staff said, "We know some of you struggle with pornography, and we want to help you." And it was in that context that I felt like, okay, it's safe here. And so it was in that context that I found, I guess, the courage to kind of step forward and say, like, this is something that I struggle with.
Hi, welcome to MedCircle's It's All in Your Head podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Colbeth, and it's great to be with you. After experiencing my own mental health struggles, I know the power in sharing our stories. So today we're going to be talking about pornography addiction, but from a woman's perspective. Jessica Harris first discovered porn accidentally while online at a young age and later became addicted. She is now a writer, speaker, and the creator of Beggar's Daughter, an organization that helps women find freedom from porn addiction. She also released a memoir in 2016 titled Beggar's Daughter and just released her new book, Quenched. She is an inspiration to so many, and we are very excited she took time out of her busy schedule to chat with us. Jessica, welcome to It's All in Your Head. Jessica, welcome to It's All in Your Head podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are very welcome. We're really excited to talk to you today. I think it is certainly helpful for the audience anytime we're talking to someone to, if you could give us some context maybe in what life was like before falling into your addiction.
So I grew up in a very conservative family, a conservative Christian family, and it was a very broken family too. So my dad was abusive, and he left our family when I was in elementary school, first or second grade. He just packed up all of his stuff and left our house one day without telling anybody. And so we found out after school was over, and my mom went back to the house and discovered that all of his stuff was gone. So a broken family, and just we struggled a lot with emotion and with how to like cope through those sorts of things. The family I grew up in didn't necessarily support the idea of counseling and seeking out mental health. It was like Jesus fixes everything. And so you have to try harder, and you have to just love God more. And I also grew up in the middle of what I call the true love waits movement, which is in conservative Christianity, we also call it the purity culture, where there was this, we don't talk about sex other than to say that you don't have it. And so that was kind of the framework and the groundwork for when I started to struggle with pornography. That's kind of the situation I was coming from, was a very strict religious setting in both my family and in my church, one that did not have open conversations about coping with things, about emotion, and definitely not about sex. So that's where I started from.
Wow. Almost has to be a little bit like a forbidden fruit almost in that type of environment. Whereas my parents sat me down and gave me the birds and the bees talk, pretty open, candid, maybe more candid than I wanted to be, but it never felt, I think because they sat me down, it never felt as much like, a forbidden fruit, but it sounds like that's definitely something, in your environment that was there. Were you young when you watched your first porn? I'm kind of wondering, what age you had access to that. Right.
So I found pornography when I was 13. This is back in 1999, where, this dial-up internet and floppy disks, and like, it's not now where, even my daughter knows how to use an iPad and she's 3. Like, it's not the same world anymore. But yeah, I was 13. We had just gotten the internet. I mean, this is a long time ago.
I remember this.
So it was kind of like the first opportunity that I had to even use the internet. I had found pornography. I definitely didn't go looking for it. I was actually researching for school. I was a very good student. And so I was researching for school. I was researching for a science project. Oh. And it wasn't YouTube, because I don't think YouTube was a thing back then. And definitely dial-up could not handle YouTube. But it was a similar sort of website full of just little tiny video clips. And I'm just clicking through them, whatever. There's frogs catching flies. Like there's all kinds of little clips like that. And then one of them is a hardcore pornography video. And it was just bam, just like that. And I remember thinking, what is this? Like, what on earth am I seeing right now? And then it's like, oh, this is what we're not allowed to talk about. So that forbidden fruit idea kind of that you were talking about. Oh, this is what no one wants me to know about. This is what no one wants to say anything to me about. So it was like, woo, what is this? And I kind of got sucked into like this pop-up vortex that ended up taking me to a pornography website. So I started just researching for school, and within minutes was like on a hardcore porn website, completely not looking for it.
Yeah, that's not the first time I've talked to people that struggle with porn addiction. It wasn't the days when you had to walk into a video store and go behind a black curtain and, maybe bump into a neighbor or two. These are images and like first exposures that are just somehow getting through the feed and literally just popping up.
Right.
I've certainly had that happen before. Was there a feeling when you would see that? I mean, I kind of recall how I felt the first time I watched a porn. Was there like an immediate kind of gratification? I tried to relate in the way of drinking. When I used to drink, it was kind of that immediate, like, okay, in my mind, I think I'm decompressing. I'm wondering if I had a similar feeling.
I don't think the first one was like that for me. So the first exposure was actually, I think it's fair to say it was actually more traumatic. So you go from knowing absolutely nothing. I mean, imagine if you were like 13 years old and walked in on somebody doing that. Like, it wouldn't be like, well, this is gratifying. It would be like, this is terrifying. What just happened? And I think it was that sort of level, not having a context for what I was seeing, like not understanding what I was seeing, not being able to explain, or just not having that. And that's one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about protecting kids from pornography, is like, if you talk with them about it, then you give them a vocabulary for it. And so then if they get exposed to it, they can immediately go, oh, that's what this is. So it's not as big and as scary, like they have something for it. So I think my first exposure, just because I wasn't looking for it, and because of the nature of that particular video, which I could still remember to this day, because of the nature of that video being itself so violent and graphic, it was definitely more traumatic. But it opened up the gateway, like that curiosity kind of, where eventually it became like, oh, certain videos, like if I pick other ones, those ones kind of make me feel good, but the first one definitely did not.
Yeah, no, to your point, it is. I like that you use the word gateway, because, there are certainly a bazillion different types. It's hard to even, nowadays, like get away from the advertisements.
Right.
So I can totally appreciate that first experience being jarring as hell as a 13-year-old. At what age do you think you were like, okay, it took X amount of time for me to sit there and go, oh, maybe this is substituting something, or maybe I'm doing this and it's not making me feel good?
Yeah. So I would say I definitely knew it was a problem by the time I was a senior in high school. So within 4 years. Up until that point, I was kind of like, this is a healthy gateway, or a healthy way for me to explore sex and to explore my sexuality. Like, I don't have to worry about sleeping with somebody. I don't have to worry about everything that can come with that, the STDs and the unwanted pregnancies. No risk, zero risk. Like, this is totally safe. I'm going to go ahead and do this. And so in my mind, even though I was raised in a Christian home, and obviously I'm attending a church that had like zero level of being okay with this, I was still going, this has a place in my life. And then by the time I got to be a senior in high school, it went from like having a place in my life to like taking over my life, to the point that I would come home from school. I would call my mom, because this is dial-up, right? So dial-up takes your phone line. And so I would call my mom at work, figure out when she was going to be done at work, and then say, okay, Mom, well, I'm going to go ahead and be studying. I'm going to be using the internet for all these research projects, and I'll see you when you get home. And then I would just get on the computer and just watch pornography for hours, however long she had said that she was going to be gone. And then, say she said she was going to be home at 6, I would at 5:45 delete my internet history, go down through and type in a bunch of educational sounding websites so that it looked like I had been doing research. And then I would wait, we'd do dinner and normal stuff. The computer was in her room. So at nighttime, I wasn't able to use it. But at night, what I would do is I would go out into our living room, and we had cable. And back in the day, you'll remember this, back in the day, if you didn't get a channel, it was just static. But every now and then a scene could like pop through. And so I would sit in our living room and just watch a snowstorm, basically waiting for pornographic scenes to pop through on the computer or on the TV screen. And then I would just do that until I was exhausted. I would be sure to change the channels back to what they were before, so that way she never knew. And I made sure to put the remote control right back where it was. And then I would sleep for like 2 hours, and then I would go to school, and I'd be completely exhausted. And when I started to like struggle with my schoolwork, when I started to struggle with my studies, when I wasn't getting work done, and I had always been a 4.0 straight A student, when that felt threatened, that's when it was like, I need to stop. Like, this is too big now. Like, this is the only thing I do in life other than school. Like, I go to school and I read erotica on the school computers. And then I come home and I watch pornography. Like, this is literally all I do with my life. And so that's when I tried to stop, and I found out that I couldn't. So that's when it was like, okay, this has just become a big problem now. Like, this is something that is out of control, and I feel like I can't control it at all.
And you just described beautifully, Jessica, the amount of work you have to put in to cover tracks, to keep track of who's going what, where, and then your life starts to become based around whatever 2 hours, right? Or a couple hours, that you can be alone with that. And just the preoccupation, I think, is almost just torture. It's got to be absolutely torturous.
Yeah.
And getting to that, and you were young to come, I think, to that realization around 17 that, this is becoming a problem. I'm starting to fall behind in my grades. It's taking up too much time. I'm physically exhausted from the hiding and the running around and the not sleeping. What gave you the strength in the courage to say, you know what, I do realize that I'm sort of powerless over this? Where did you turn to get your power back at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I wanted so badly to feel like I could tell somebody and get help. And I looked for help. So this is early 2000s. I graduated in 2003 from high school. And so do the math. But I looked online thinking like, surely there's got to be, something out there. Somebody's got to have written something about this. There's got to be something I can do. And there was nothing. And it's like, well, I'm not going to tell my family because that's not going to go over well. I'm not going to tell my church because that's not going to go over well. And so I kind of waited until I had graduated high school and I was going off to college. And I thought, okay, if anybody has seen this before, it's going to be the staff at a college. Like, surely I'm not the only woman in the world who has done this. And like, they're going to have something for it. So I'm going to go, but I need to get caught because I was so afraid of like starting that conversation. Like, opening up and saying like, hey, this is me and this is who I am, just felt so intimidating and so like, there's no way like that'll kill me. Like it just felt like I will die if I have to do that. And so I went off to college, and I didn't know that they had, they tracked your internet usage there. It was a Christian college. And so they track your internet usage. Every student has their own login onto the internet and they track it. I had no idea. So I go to college and I'm still using like a lot. I'm in a room with one other woman. She's had to buy a sleep mask because I'm using the computer all night long. And I have like a Word document up on the screen, but then I have a porn video like down here in the corner that I'm watching. And then I would stay up all night. Basically, I would go and do my work study job at 5 a.m. I would walk back and sleep through my classes, essentially. So that's the level I was using even at a Christian college. And needless to say, I got caught because they're tracking the internet history. And I was kind of excited because I was like, okay, someone's going to help me now. Like now they know, and I don't have to tell them, like they know. And I went into the dean's office, and they had summoned me in because obviously I was breaking the rules. And the dean started talking about the wrongs of pornography and how sick and how just horrible it was. And she said, whoever's doing this needs help, because they had printed off my internet history. And I mean, the folder was so thick, and someone had gone through and just highlighted the websites that you couldn't like explain away. Well, that's a cooking website. Like you couldn't do that. They went through and they highlighted the ones that were obviously like pornographic. And it was such a thick folder. And I'd only been there maybe 6 weeks. And she said, that being said, we know this wasn't you. Women just don't have this problem.
Wow.
And so level of like, so I just got caught and it did nothing. It didn't help at all. And I felt like the only woman in the world who had managed to get herself into this. And they basically said, we know you've given your password away to some of your male classmates. Like, how dare you? What a horrible person you are for doing this. You need to stop protecting them. They need help. And I'm thinking like, I'm the one who needs help. But they made me change my password, and I had to sign a contract and all this stuff. I just remember thinking there's no help for me at all. So that sunk me into not a good place at all. And it wasn't until a year later, I was at a different college, and the dean's staff said, we know some of you struggle with pornography. Wow. And we want to help you. And it was in that context that I felt like, okay, it's safe here to say that this is something that I struggle with, even though it still was terrifying to say that. And it still was terrifying to own that kind of, and to take off that mask and to say, this is part of my story. But to know that it wasn't going to shock them, if that makes sense. I wasn't the only one. Like they were saying, we know some of you struggle with this and we want to help you. And so it was in that context that I found, I guess, the courage to kind of step forward and say, like, this is something that I struggle with.
Yeah, it's funny how the right environment can elicit different reactions, two very different reactions. I'm wondering if that was a place where you got to maybe meet someone for the first time that struggled with that, just like you did, and what it was like to maybe meet a peer that could totally relate.
You know, it's funny because we actually the way that meeting was set up was kind of like you shared your story privately. So like you privately like said, this is what I struggle with. Yeah. But what they did was they had us go to the bookstore on campus and buy this big workbook for helping to break free from pornography. And it was like 8.5 by 11, super thick, spiral brown, and bright blue. And it was like the most obnoxious thing. But we never had like a support group or anything. But like if you had to get that book, you knew what it was for. And so I remember like seeing it in classmates' bags and being like, oh, her too, or oh, her too. And it wasn't until after I got out of college and then started sharing my story that other friends stepped forward and were like, that's part of my story too, like me too. And then it was this really kind of neat, oh, wow, like you struggled with this too. I struggled with this. It makes me feel less like a freak and more like this is something that we all can work through and overcome.
Yeah, I can relate to that. When I would carry, being a recovering alcoholic, when I would carry the big book of AA, they call it like the big blue book. I was in Chicago and I would put like a paper, like old school, kind of like a paper bag around, fold it. So like you couldn't see any of the jacket cover, but like if you saw someone else with one, it was kind of like a, hey, also a topic people, aren't, super eager to shout from the rooftops. What was in the workbook? Was it just notes that you would take from the meetings, or were there like different exercises? I'm wondering like what the content looked like at that.
Right. So the college that I went to is a Christian college. I'm a Christian still, even though I was raised in a Christian home, that I have issues with certain parts of how I was raised growing up, but my faith is still something that I've held on to. And so this was a Christian college. So it was coming at it from that lens of it was actually very gracious, but it was kind of working through like what drives us to pornography and what needs are we trying to meet in that. And so it was like a 40-day workbook. And at the end of every lesson were like reflective questions. And then there were kind of accountability questions. Have you looked at pornography since the last time that you met with your mentor, for lack of a better word?
Sure.
And so there were questions like that at the end of everything, and just questions to help like reflect on your struggle and on your journey and like understand what need were you trying to meet in pursuing this, and why did pornography have such a hold on your life, kind of working through those different things.
Yeah, it's almost like a path to you lead yourself to your own conclusion, and self-discovery, but, they kind of have a nice paved road almost to at least, let you get there through your own self-introspection. When I talk to a lot of people who struggle with this, they would struggle with romantic relationships. A lot of times either performance or just the fear of intimacy. And I'm wondering if you had any romantic relationships during those times where, it was impacting that as well.
Yeah. And interesting about that, I actually didn't, I didn't go on my first date till I was 27. And I wanted to date before then, but I got married when I was 32.
Okay.
And so this is several years. So you would think like, oh, you're like, I would tell people I found freedom like in 2006. And so this is several years after that. And so you would think like, done. But weeks before our wedding, I just had this moment of like, oh, snap, I have to sleep with this person. And I was kind of like, it sent me into a panic attack, full on panic attack. And I almost got to the point where I was like, can we just be like engaged for forever? Do we have to go this far? Because there was just this level of almost terror of, like, I don't know what to do. And how can I say that? Because I've watched, 4 years worth of like endless pornography. Like, obviously, like I'm not naive. Right. But in those weeks before our wedding, there was just this fear of it actually being me. And I did end up seeing a counselor for that. And that's where a lot of work was done talking about the trauma of being exposed to pornography before you're ready, like before you're developmentally ready to like understand these sorts of things, or before you have a context for them, like the type of trauma that can cause in your heart and in your mind. And then as I'm standing on the brink of like going to marry somebody, it would it's basically unearthing that trauma, because outside of that, once I was done and free from pornography, like sex wasn't really like a thing I worried about. I was a virgin when I got married. So like, it wasn't like I had been exploring around and toying around with this idea. I had kind of put it in a box and like left it alone. And obviously when you're weeks away from your wedding, the box comes out. It's like, I haven't dealt with what's in this box.
Yes.
So it's interesting because for me, that particular part of healing was like delayed, for years because it wasn't something I was needing to address, I guess, when I was breaking free. It wasn't something that I was worried about per se. I wasn't dating anybody while I was addicted to pornography. I wasn't with anybody like in the years right after. And so it was many, many years later that part of this unearthed.
And did you tell him about this before like, was he hip to your struggle, or were you like me and just like for years would date someone and like never tell them that I had bipolar 2 disorder or a recovering alcoholic? Did you keep it like under wraps, or were you able to share that with him before?
Yeah. So funny story. In 2016, I wrote my story out in a book and shared kind of my journey of faith and struggling with pornography and finding freedom. He read that book first. So that's how he found out about me. And so I remember writing that book and thinking, this is it. Like no one's ever going to love me because they're never going to be able to see past this, and I hated that because I feel like I have so much more to offer than what's in that book.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so I just remember thinking, this is it. Like, I'm going to be single for the rest of my life because I'm sharing this story. But I felt like it was super important to share the story and it needed to be shared. So he actually picked up the book to be able to use it. He works in counseling. So he picked it up to be able to use it with women who would come to him for help. And he was reading through it and realized that we lived near each other. And so he reached out to me and ordered a case of the books and then also asked to get to know me better. And I was kind of like, red flag, weirdo alert, because I have plenty of men who email wanting to get to know me better.
I was just going to say, I don't think he was the first email.
Right. He was not. And so I was like, I'll send you the books, but like, no, we're not getting to know each other better. Obviously that did not work out. He's very persistent in a good way, not like in a creepy, annoying way, but it was really neat. So then we still had a deeper conversation because like, obviously my whole story isn't in that book either. So there was still a conversation before we got married where I sat down and like, we talked more in depth about what my story looked like, but it was kind of neat in the end to have him meet me that way. Cause it's like, he already knows like the one thing that I would have hidden from him probably the longest. He knew before he even like reached out to me. He had already read that part of my story and knew that part of my story.
That's great. Sometimes I wish I could give people a manual and be like, kind of read this and then if you want to still talk to me, great. Right. This book took off. Can you tell us a little bit more? Obviously, I'm sure it was absolutely anxiety-ridden event writing the book, but sounds like you found a lot of freedom in that, and so have a lot of other people. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and what inspired you to write it?
Yeah. So when I started sharing my story in 2009, I was doing it because no one else was. Right. And I was struggling with what to do next in my life. And this really just felt like what God wanted me to do was to go ahead and share my story. And I remember thinking like, nobody needs this. This is so stupid. I'm not doing this. This is dumb. I don't want to do this. This is like the last thing that I want people to know about me. I'm not going online as the girl who talks about porn. Like that's not happening. Okay. And so I argued back and forth a little bit with God on that one. And then finally launched my website in 2009. And just the response was overwhelming, even at the beginning, of women that I knew who came forward and said, oh my goodness, like me too. And I thought I was alone. And it's something that I feel like every woman who struggles with this says, it's like, I thought I was alone. And so over the next few years, I would speak occasionally. I would write a lot on the blog. And then I was asked to speak at an international event in 2016 and share my story. And so I thought, you know what? When you're on the stage, you only get 45 minutes. And I want to give people something that they can hold on to and then they could understand more, because I'm not going to line up and answer questions for hundreds of people afterwards. So I wrote it all down in a book because I wanted to get it out there. Like, this is what it can look like for a woman who has this struggle. And it doesn't have to be, I think, especially in faith circles, we kind of have this image of what that woman looks like, and she dresses this way and she does her hair and makeup this way and she listens
like a big slut. She looks like a big slut.
And so I wanted to kind of break down that image where it can be your good Christian girl, your 4.0 student who has this kind of struggle. And when we don't talk about it, we're not helping them. And so I spoke at this event, sold the book there, it sold out there. And then I started to travel. Like, people were asking me to come and speak at their churches and at their colleges, like all around the world. So for about a year or so, I just got to travel all over and talk about this. And probably one of my favorite stories of it was going to a town in Australia and talking there in Australia and basically talking to a church there and saying that same message of like, listen, when you're not talking about this and when you're making it some problem that the women out there have and not talking about the fact that like women here have it, and women here can struggle with pornography, you are just shaming them and you're putting them under a stigma and you're not helping them, and you can't help them because you're not opening up that conversation for them. And so I presented this church as part of a series of talks down there. And then about 6 months later, I get a phone call from a colleague who's also a speaker. And he was in this same town at the same church, actually, for a conference. And he called me and he said, Jessica, I was at this conference and they brought in a male speaker who talked about how men struggle with pornography. And he was like, I was so mad because he never once mentioned that women can struggle with this. And he was like, I was absolutely fuming because he never once talked about how women can have this problem too. And he says, so I went to like a breakout session with some of the other pastors here because it was a pastor's conference. And he says, I was ready to like go. I was ready to let him have it and ready to let him say like, women do have this problem. We need to talk about it. And he says, but they were already having that discussion. They were already in there going, I can't believe this guy didn't talk about women having this struggle too. Like, I can't believe that he didn't say something about that. And he said to them, like, how do you know that? Like, where is this coming from? And they said, oh, we had this woman, Jessica, come a few months ago and talk about it here. And like, we've remembered what she said and we've taken it back to our groups. And so it was just so neat to realize that it's like changing slowly, but it's changing. Like, part of the conversation is changing, that this isn't just something that guys struggle with. Like, this is something that women can struggle with too.
And that's why we were so happy to have you on, because we love to bust stigmas. That's the best. And I've noticed women really do get dismissed when it comes to this type of addiction. Just kind of, well, men are dogs. Of course, they watch a ton of that. There's also that difficulty, right, for the men.
Right.
Almost like, you're guilty before, even charged. But it's good to know you can literally kind of see the stigma slowly get erased, at least, in Australia, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. Do you still go around in travel? I know you have young children, but are you still able to pursue that in different speaking engagements and getting the message out there?
Yeah. So COVID kind of put a big kibosh in a lot of that. And up until then, though, I was. So I actually traveled to Mexico right after I got married. So 2 days after my wedding, my husband and I were in Mexico so I could speak there. And then a few months later, I was in Singapore speaking there on the same topic. And then COVID happened and now we've got the babies. So I do a lot more virtual stuff now. I just was part of a virtual conference last month on the entire conference was for women who struggle with pornography. So 30 plus speakers all sharing different approaches to this, including therapists and others like that. So I still love to share and love to be a part of that, but I'm also excited too, because there's kind of new voices coming up that are younger and cooler and better on like TikTok than I am. And so it's neat to encourage them and to kind of mentor them and help them to kind of step in that role. I tell people like, I'm not going to be relevant for forever. Like there's going to be a point where the kids, it's going to be too hard with the babies or you just have to pass off that baton kind of. You've done your job, you've paved the way, you've started the conversation, and then you hand it off to somebody else. I don't think it's meant to be a monopoly. I'm not making my millions off of it for sure. So it's just nice to see younger voices coming up through that have a much stronger following because they're identifying more. Again, it's that exponential growth curve. And I'm a millennial, and millennials, it's not as much of an issue as it is with Generation Z. So to have Gen Zers come up and say, like, hey, this is my story, this is my struggle, they impact their generation more. So I like whatever opportunities I'm given, I take, but I do like to see other people have the same opportunities too.
That's awesome. And the millennials really did corner the market, I think, on making what used to be taboo topics a little more acceptable. Certainly wasn't my generation. But I definitely think culturally they have provided and kind of paved the way for an environment still intimidating, right? But maybe even just a bit less. Now, we talked earlier, I had mentioned how when I was younger, my parents, they used to call it the birds and the bees talks. And, for all the millennials that might be watching, it's the sex talk. And parents sit their kids down at different ages. I got to be honest, mine may have sat me down after I lost my virginity to give me the talk. They may have been a little behind the curve, but you have young children now. You see young women all the time. Is there a talk to be had with kids? Just sort of like whether it's birds and the bees, don't do drugs, is there a place in the conversation to approach this like you would, any other behavioral addiction? And I'm wondering what that talk might look like or sound like.
Yeah, so absolutely. There's absolutely a place for this, and a great resource for it is Protect Young Minds. And they are a group that specifically helps equip parents to have these kinds of conversations with their young children, because there's this understanding that when a young child is exposed to something like pornography, and the average age of exposure is anywhere from 9 to 11, depending on what study you read. And so we're talking like 9-year-olds to 11-year-olds. I have talked to women who were exposed in kindergarten. So when you expose that kind of that young, tender brain to content like this, that starts to like trigger responses in their body that they don't understand, if you do not give them a framework for that, it does not help them. It continues to be a trauma. Whereas if you prepare them for that and prepare them for understanding that they might come across this content, and then give them a plan for what to do when they do, you help give them resiliency in a way. Like you help it so that if they're exposed to it, when they're exposed to it, it's not going to knock them on their butts. Like they're going to know and be able to know what to do with it. And so they have 2 books called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. And those books are not religious based. They are based in neuroscience, actually. And so they talk about how you might see pictures online, and they might like make your brain feel a certain way, and what to do when that happens, and that there's nothing wrong or dirty with you. If you find those sorts of things, just to come to mommy and daddy, and like we'll help you with them. So it's kind of opening up the conversation, because this is what I tell parents. I used to do parent workshops all the time. And I tell parents, whoever tells your kid first, because this is how kid brains work, whoever tells your kid first is the expert. So if they find out about sex from a friend in first grade, that friend in first grade may only be 6 years old, but they obviously know everything. And you, mom and dad, know zilch, right. And you will never be able to convince them otherwise. Like you will never be able to convince your child. Why? Because they didn't hear about it from you. They heard about it from their friend. So parents get so worried, especially in Christian conservative circles, of like, I don't want to steal their innocence. I don't want to expose them to this. And like, you're not exposing them to this. You're stepping forward and saying, I am a safe place for you to come to and have this conversation. I am aware that this is out there and I want to protect you from it. But if I can't, if something that I do doesn't work, or if a friend does this, like, I want you to know that you can come to me. You are you are being their safe place. Like you are protecting their innocence. When you don't give them a context and you're quiet about it, they feel like they can't come to you. And so I encourage parents that it's not one talk. And it's never should have been one talk, but I feel like it always has been. Like we've always held on to it. Like, okay, this is the big one, and I have to figure out exactly the right time to have it. And so then when you do that, you end up missing it. Yes. I know my mom tried to sit me down when I was like 16 to talk to me about sex, and I was kind of like, I might know a lot more than you think I know right now. Totally. So I think we have to kind of get away from this idea that it's like holding all of this information in for one talk. If my daughter sees somebody who's pregnant, like, mommy, what's wrong with her belly? You have age appropriate conversations as they're exposed to things. And I tell parents, when you hand your kid a device, an iPad, an iPhone, it is the equivalent of like when I was growing up of like sending them to the playground alone. You are sending them to an online playground alone. And yes, it could be so much fun, but there are predators out there. There are people who are not acting with their best intentions. And so you want to be involved in what your kids are doing online, and you want to prepare them for that. So even with my 3-year-old, I think we've had a couple times where I've said, baby, if you ever see a picture of someone with no clothes on, like, you tell mommy. She doesn't need to know that it's called pornography. She doesn't need to know that there's like sex. Like, her framework is, this person does not have clothes on. Like, I'm telling mommy, and mommy's going to do something about it. So, and then as she gets older, that conversation can change. But if there's a parent curious about like how to have that conversation in a way that's not as intimidating, I highly recommend those books, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. And the junior one's actually designed for ages 3 to 5, I believe. And so even as young as 3. And why? Because if I'm handing her an iPad, I am giving her access to that. Like I would never give my child pornography, like, ever. But when I hand her an iPad that has access to the internet, there is that rare chance, even with guided access on, there is that chance that she can come across something. And so I want her to know that if she does, she can come to me. And so I think that's the kind of talk we need to be having as parents. If you come across this, you can come and ask me. Like, I want to be your expert. I want to be the person who you feel safe to talk to, not your friends who have no idea what they're talking about.
And it almost has, in something I like about this talk is also, too, a lot of young children might be susceptible to some sort of strange sexual abuse. They might not know it's not common and inappropriate for an adult, certainly anytime, to be, naked with a child. If it's a teacher, if it's a babysitter, I'm just kind of, my brain starts going where, I would want, if I had a child, them to tell me anytime, any place, if that happened, and exactly who that person is.
Right.
I have to imagine these talks can have ancillary benefits where a child will know, hey, I can speak up about this. I'm not just going to be quiet, and have that continue to make me uncomfortable.
Right. And that's one of the things in the parent workshops when I would talk about like protecting your kids from predators. One of the things that predators will ask is like, if you can talk to your mommy and daddy about like certain things, and they might even bring up something sexual, or they might even show a pornographic image, like, did your mommy and daddy tell you about this? Or they're trying to figure out if this potential victim is going to be an informant, when the child says, oh yes, I can talk to mommy and daddy about anything, or like, yes, mommy and daddy told me about that, or mommy and daddy have told me about this, or they've told me no secrets, or they've told me I'm not supposed to take off my clothes in front of people. And that's actually part of my younger story that we didn't talk about, but I was molested in elementary school by a classmate. Oh. And so the other day, my daughter is still like learning like how to dress herself and how to put on clothes, and she's running around the house. And I just happened to say like, hey, baby, just so you know, we always wear clothes when we're outside of the house. We always wear clothes when we're in the car, like just trying to kind of give her that framework so that if somebody were to say like, take your clothes off for me, she could kind of go like, oh, we always wear clothes like when we're outside. And so I hate that we even have to have those kinds of discussions. Like I hate it. I hate that for her. I have 2 daughters, so I hate it for both of them. But yeah, just wanting to have that safety for her and having just her to know that that's a boundary that we have. We've talked about like how no one sees your bottom. You know, you always wear undies, so like no one sees your bottom. Like just having those kinds of conversations so that if somebody comes up to her and asks her to do something that's like wildly inappropriate, she will come to us. And that's one of the things that we've seen as you like study this and as you look into how to protect kids is like when you give them a vocabulary, you protect them. Like when you give them a context, you are protecting them from the people who are going to try to like prey on that naivety and who are going to try to prey on the secrecy and like you don't tell people about this. And when you give them that vocabulary, you give your kids a voice. And I just think that that's just so important. And as a part of this topic, pornography is used to groom children. It's part of the process. And so wanting to have her resilient against that from all angles, obviously, is my goal as a mom and something that I desire for her to keep her safe.
It's almost like if we can have when I was growing up, it was stranger danger. And parents would have the talk of don't get in anyone's car you don't know. If someone comes and, says they're here to pick you up, don't get into their car. It was sort of that. And, if we can have it for kidnapping as much as we don't want to, why shouldn't we have a similar code or flag or information, imparted for, sexual abuse? I think that would be certainly just as worthy as what to know if you're being potentially kidnapped.
Right.
Something we like to ask everybody is if there is one person, many people, anyone who is watching this right now, who is struggling with a porn addiction, what advice could you give to them?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is you're not alone. And I think even oddly enough, as much as we talk about like how all the guys do it, I feel like even men carry this level of shame.
They do
sometimes too. Sure. And so you're not alone. And I think women, we like to like make ourselves be alone. So it's like, well, yeah, fine. Jessica struggled with pornography, but I struggle with this specific kind of pornography. Like I insist on being the only person who's had this issue, and you're great, but you're not that special. So, so you are not alone. You have not managed to get yourself into a mess that no other woman in the world has ever gotten herself into. I know women who were like in the porn industry and have gotten out. So, I would say you're not alone, and that it's definitely not worth the amount of time it's taking up in your life. Like if I look back at like 17-year-old me and the amount of time that I spent invested almost in pornography and the risks that I took when it came to, watching it at school with my roommate sleeping right behind me, we didn't talk about this either, but I sent nudes to a complete stranger online. And I look back now at 17-year-old me and I want to like smack her because I'm like, what were you thinking? Like knowing all that I know now about the dangers of online predators and the girls who are like kidnapped and like taken into sex trafficking. Wow. But man, it can take you into such a dark place. And so I would just say you're not alone. And one of the keys to getting out is to share your story, is to tell somebody that that's where you are. And I think pornography can be kind of tricky because there are definitely people who don't have a problem with it and who use it recreationally. And if you come to them and say, hey, I'm addicted to porn, they might go like, oh, well,
Right.
So definitely share your story and share why it matters to you that you want to get out. Like kind of share your why in a way of like, I don't want this to be taking over my life. I don't want this to be the only thing I think about all day long. Like, I don't want these images to pop up all the time. Like, I don't want to, there's a woman who wrote me years ago, but she's a married woman and she couldn't be intimate with her husband without going into the bathroom and watching porn first. Like her own husband couldn't turn her on, like a real life man in front of her couldn't do it for her. She would have to go into the bathroom and watch pornography as like her own personal foreplay and go back out to be with him.
Yeah.
And then she was just thinking about it the whole time. And so like, is that the authentic connection and relationships that we're made for? Is that really what we want? And I feel like pornography capitalizes on false connections. It gives you like the satisfaction of a sexual relationship without the relationship. And so I just would encourage people kind of to fight that. And you fight that by intentionally connecting with other people and intentionally saying like, this is part of my story. And this is a part of my story that I want to overcome. And this is part of the story that I want to get out of. And these are my reasons why. For me, that comes from a faith basis. It comes from fighting and believing that God has a better plan in store for my marriage and in store for me and my sexuality. Like, obviously not everyone comes from that angle. And some people just want to be free because they don't feel like it's good for them anymore. They're not getting joy and pleasure from it, or they're finding it's robbing joy and pleasure somewhere else in their life. Like, they're not finding time for their spouse, or they're not really connecting with their kids, or they're not really making time for their friends. Like, whatever your why is, like, hold on to that and find the resources that you need to pursue freedom from this.
It sounds like paying it forward for you is a great and awesome way to continue to maintain your strength in sharing your story. Would that be accurate?
I think that's part of it. And I also think that as you're removed from whatever your struggle was, like, I mean, I've only struggled with pornography, I've never struggled with drugs or alcohol or anything like that. But as you walk in freedom, it becomes less and less appealing to go back. So like, as you step forward and step into that good life and a good, healthy marriage and like mothering my kids, like this is what I'm made for, not to sit in front of a screen, watching other people have sex. Like, this is what I'm made for. And so as you step into that and kind of walk in your calling and walk in what you're made for, you find things like that losing their appeal, even like it's not even interesting anymore. And so I think that's, for me, that would have been encouraging to hear when I was 17 years old and trying to break free. Like, will I ever actually be able to like have a normal life after this? And the answer is yes.
Jessica, I can't thank you enough for chatting with us today. It's been awesome listening to your story. You're so open and courageous with your lived experience with this. I know you're going to help so many people who are watching this, and I hope you stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you all for joining today's conversation with Jessica Harris. I think it's important to remind people that addiction to pornography is not just a male problem. Women struggle with this too, but they get the additional shame of people not thinking this even happens to them. Jessica's time and dedication to helping others all over the world is truly inspiring. I really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you visit MedCircle.com, you can access tons of other combos, including weekly workshops with our credentialed doctors, an award-winning video library featuring almost 1,000 educational videos on a variety of topics. Become a member of our community today. Visit MedCircle.com to learn more. Thank you for listening to It's All in Your Head, and tune in to my live YouTube recap of this episode with MedCircle host Kyle Kittleson this Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Take care.